Let's bow our heads for a prayer, and we'll begin. Our Father in heaven, I ask that you will bless us as we talk about the Holy Bible, about truth. I ask for this gift in the name of Jesus. Amen. Every now and again, it happens in my life that I come across some objection to faith that I don't know the answer to. Some issue either between history and the Bible, or a contradiction apparently in the Bible, or some issue related to science, and I just can't see my way through it. When that happens, there are many people who believe that the most rational thing I could do would be to jettison my faith. That is, if I don't have a rational solution, then the rational solution is to give up on faith. I want to explain to you briefly why that isn't true. When I talk about why I believe, you might draw a little graph over time about my reasons for belief, and that graph would look something like this. I mean, initially, the reason I believed is because my mother was a believer. That's why. Of course, that isn't a very deep source of faith. But there came a point when I began to investigate for myself, to try to find out what is right, what is true. Is my mom right? Was my mother wrong? Who else is right? Who could be wrong? Is there even a God? I began to study to know for myself. And when I did, I found a lot of data. I've shared in previous lectures in the last couple days about how I found data in the Bible regarding health, data in the Bible regarding prophecy, that showed me unmistakably that there's just no way I could rationally doubt that an inspired source has had something to do with the Bible. There's information here that I can't see any other way that it could come. Well, that health information, that prophecy information that's been so helpful to me, eventually was supplemented by my own experience. I would pray and see an answer to prayer. I would see God bringing me wisdom and counsel at the time I needed it, comfort at a time when that was needed. So I have a collection of data that is underneath in my faith. What happens now when you bring up a new objection, something I've never seen before? Well, we're not here, we're here. And when you bring up something that I don't know, I'm not weighing this perplexity against nothing. It's not a perplexity on one side and no information on the other. It's a perplexity on one side and a great deal of data on the other. And it would be irrational for me to give up my faith based on one perplexity. That would be taking all of this data I've accumulated and throwing it out because of something that I can't resolve. There's nothing rational or sensible about that. I think maybe a good step for us now would be to really look at what the Bible says about faith. Does the Bible, for example, require what some have called a leap in the dark? This is the way many scientists see faith. They see that science is where you get a light and you shine it carefully to find a safe place, and then you take a step. And if you hear a rattle, like a rattlesnake, you back up and you look some more. And when you're comfortable, you take a step. That's how people see science. They see faith quite different. You turn off the flashlight and you hope for the best, and you take a jump. Have you ever heard that kind of phrase, a leap in the dark for faith? That's not my faith. I don't see any value in closing your eyes and jumping. I don't see God ever asking anyone to just believe on a basis of zero evidence. Instead, what God has done is he's given abundant evidence. And someone might say, he hasn't given enough for me. Let me reply a bit. Well, what if God did give overwhelming evidence of his existence and the truthfulness of the Bible? I mean, it could happen. Angels could blaze across the sky. That you need to believe your Bible, read your Bible. The houses of those who don't believe could start shaking until they finally confess their faith. God could compel belief. But if he did, would anyone love him? Here's what I mean. That God is looking for something called love and trust. Love and trust is the basis of every valuable relationship that you've ever had. Love and trust are the basis of warmth and intimacy. That is how you get close to someone. That's how you could get close to God. And there's no way that God could ever develop love and intimacy with any human if he gave an overwhelming, compelling evidence of his existence. So what he has done instead is he has backed up and given to us abundant evidence, but not compelling evidence. Plenty of data, but not the kind that chases you down, holds you down, and says, believe or else. He just isn't doing that. He never will. He doesn't want to. If you're asking, why hasn't he forced me to believe? It's because he doesn't want to force you to believe. If he forced you to believe, you would never have a chance to show your love and your faith, your character. It just wouldn't be there. But that's enough talk. Let's look at some ideas in the Bible that might be surprising. Turn in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8 is where we're going to launch into a study of what the Bible says about faith. We'll begin in verse 5. Matthew 8, verse 5. And when Jesus was entered into Capernaum, there came unto him a centurion, beseeching him. A centurion, that's a Roman soldier that has under him generally 100 soldiers. And here comes this man with administrative authority. He comes to Jesus and he's pleading with Jesus for something. Let's read on, verse 6. He said, Lord, my servant lies at home, sick of the palsy, grievously tormented. Can you see that this man doesn't have the idea of slavery that some have had in the last couple hundred years in this world? He doesn't view his servant as a slave, as an animal, as a possession. Does he care about his servant? He cares enough to make a personal effort to approach a stranger and to plead on the basis of the suffering of his servant. This is the way the man thinks. Verse 7, and Jesus said to him, I will come and heal him. Not often does Jesus say something like that to someone. Not often does Jesus follow someone home to do a miracle. But let's just read on what happens here. The centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant will be healed. What did the soldier say? He said, Jesus, I don't deserve a gift from you. I don't deserve something from God. I'm not asking on the basis of the fact that I have 100 employees under me. I'm not asking on the basis of the fact that I'm an important man. I know I don't deserve anything. The reason I'm asking is because I need something and you can give it. My need is the reason I'm coming, but I certainly don't presume that you would become a guest at my home. I don't have any worthiness that would require you or would even invite you to take a journey especially for my case. That's the view the man has. Contrast it with what you know about the faith of some. There are some who, if God answers their prayer, they feel like it's just about what ought to be, that's what should happen. And if they don't get an answer to their prayer with a yes, they begin to talk about like what's wrong with God. Almost as if we're entitled. And I haven't been in New Zealand long enough to know how people are here, but I know Western civilization generally is raising a generation of young people who feel some sort of entitlement, like they deserve a place to stay and food to eat and a comfortable life and a decent desk job. And if that's what's going to happen all over the planet, it's going to be bad news about 30 years from now. Entitlement leads to disappointment. I'm not going to go into philosophy. You can think that through yourself. But this centurion doesn't feel entitlement. He doesn't feel like he deserves anything. He's coming to plead because he has a need. Now notice what happens next. Verse 9. For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this man, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled, and said to them that followed, truly I say to you, I have not found such great faith, no, not in Israel. Now that's a remarkable statement. Let's just analyze it for a bit. Jesus said, this soldier has greater faith than I have found previously anywhere in God's chosen nation. Who are some of the people that were in God's chosen nation? One of them was his mother Mary. Some of them were his disciples, Matthew and Peter and James and John and Andrew. What did Jesus say about this soldier's faith? I haven't found comparable faith anywhere that I've looked in my life in this nation. That should, at least for me, that raises my antenna, if you will. I don't want to compare myself to an insect, but I mean I pay attention. I'm looking, what is it about this faith that is so great? Well, keep it in mind and turn to chapter 15. Matthew 15 and verse 21. Then Jesus went from there and departed into the coasts of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast, and cried unto him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is terribly vexed with a devil. Jesus has wandered away from Judea, and he's in a region that historically was full of pagans. And here comes a Canaanite woman. Some versions say a Syrophoenician woman, certainly not a Jew, someone who comes from a land where the people bow down to idols. And she comes to Jesus and greets him as if she's been listening to something about him somewhere. She calls him a son of David. And she says, have mercy on me. She's crying. She's earnest. In that regard, she reminds me of the centurion. Do you remember that in Matthew 8, that he came beseeching Jesus? Well, that's what this woman is doing. But let's read on and see if there's anything else similar. Verse 23. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, send her away, because she cries after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. If I had been that woman, if you had been that woman, I think that would have been just about the end of the interview. I've come to Jesus. I pleaded with him for mercy. He didn't even answer me. I went to his disciples thinking maybe there's a protocol here. I'll try to go to and see if that helps. They don't even want to listen. In fact, they ask him to send me away. And his response is, he's not sent to help someone like me. I think if it had been me, that would have been just about the end. I would have said, okay, goodbye. Verse 25. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it is not appropriate to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. I suppose that here in New Zealand there are places where racism exists. I haven't heard any rumors about it. I just suppose it. And I lived for quite some time in Arkansas in the United States. That's a place of a lot of racism. I lived for a while about 5 miles from a town that had no black people. 0. But in the school where I was teaching, we had some out-of-state people come to study there that were various races, including black. And I remember one of my black students telling me that when he had been in town driving his own car, that a police officer had pulled him over and asked him, "What are you doing?" Not because he broke a law, just because he had a color that said, "You don't belong here." So I've lived in a place like that. I've lived where racism is real. And I know in my town, the town I was in for a few years, if I would speak to a black gentleman and use a metaphor that compares him to a dog, that would not go over well. Would that work well here in New Zealand if you're talking to someone who's a race that's despised? That metaphor would not fly. Jesus is in a situation similar where there's a lot of prejudice against non-Jews. That is, the Jews felt like they were the favored race, and those who weren't Jews were the unfavored race. And Jesus is the one who said it's not appropriate to take the bread of the children, that would be understood in that context to be the Jews, and to cast it to dogs. That would be understood in that context to be the Gentiles, including this woman. It's really one of the most troubling passages in the entire Bible when Jesus talks this way. But I want you to understand what's going on. Look at the next verse. And she said, "Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat from the crumbs which fall from their master's table." She said, "Jesus, if you're going to say I'm a dog, I want to be your pet. I want to be in your house. I want to eat your food." She said, "Just crumbs are enough for me." It wasn't, for her, there was no difficulty in being compared to a dog. She just needed help, and she wanted help, and she knew Jesus could help, and she went after that. Verse 28. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, "O woman, great is your faith. Be it unto you even as you will." And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. What happens here? It's similar to the story of the soldier. Here's what they have in common. First of all, neither one of them are part of the church. When I say the church in this context, I mean the Jewish body. Neither one of them are part of the Jews, and neither one of them feels like they deserve something from Jesus. The soldier said, "I'm not worthy." She said, "Even the dogs eat the crumbs." Both of them were asking not for themselves, but for someone else. The soldier for his servant, this woman was asking for her daughter. Both of them were earnest in their petition. They were pleading. You might remember what James said, that the effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man gets things done. But look at your own prayer and just see, is your prayer fervent? Is your prayer beseeching? Or is your prayer almost flat? Just the very opposite of fervent. Here are two people, and what does Jesus say to this woman? Great is your faith. You might not know it, so I'll just tell you. Jesus doesn't say that to anyone else during his entire life. In the recorded Gospels. There's no one else to whom Jesus says, "You have great faith." It's just these two people who are outside of the church. Is it possible that today the greatest faith is found outside of the church? Is it possible? It was in the days of Jesus. That's where it was. That's where he found it. And you might ask the question, Jesus, when you chose your disciples, why didn't you choose the soldier and the woman? I mean, they had greater faith than the ones you chose. Why not them? We will get to that answer, but let's look at what Jesus says about the disciples first. Turn back to chapter 14. Chapter 14, and let's look at verse 22. Matthew 14, verse 22. And immediately Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship, to go before him unto the other side, while he sent the multitude away. This was the hardest day for the disciples up to this point, because just a few moments before this, it looked like Jesus was going to become king. The multitude was excited. There was energy in the air. You know, if you've ever been in one of those large gatherings of people where everyone's getting excited, you can just feel the energy. It feels like we can get something done. They realize this is it. The tipping point has come. Jesus is about to start his kingdom. And Jesus, instead of cooperating, he suddenly became stern, almost mean, and he told his disciples, "Get in the boat and go." That was hard for them. Verse 23, and when he had sent the multitude away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when the evening was come, he was there alone. But the ship was now in the middle of the sea, tossed with waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, "It is a spirit." And they cried out for fear. I live in Malaysia, where there's a lot of fear of the spirits. When someone leaves animism or Buddhism and comes into Christianity, don't think that it's automatic that all of the old ideas that were with them suddenly disappear the night or morning that they're baptized. It doesn't work that way. And if for generations they've been afraid of the influence of spirits and angry spirits and curses, I find even among those who've been Christians for 2 or 3 generations in this kind of context, out of animism or Buddhism, I find lots of fear of spirits. And I work to dispel it. I teach my students that we don't have anything to fear from the devil except for lies and temptations. We don't need to fear him poking out our eye or giving us liver cancer. We need to fear him tempting us to smoke or to drink alcohol or to eat a fatty diet. Because if he wants to hurt us, he has to do it by deception and by temptation. That's all he has available. But these disciples have been following Jesus now just for a few months, and they certainly aren't at the point of having abandoned all their old fears of spirits. And when they are in a stormy sea and they see someone walking on the water, their first thought is that that's an immaterial someone. If that was a material someone, he or she could not walk on the water. And if that's an immaterial someone, that's a ghost. And if that's a ghost, we're in big trouble. And so they cried out. Verse 27, but straightway Jesus spake unto them, saying, Be of good cheer, it is I, do not be afraid. And Peter answered and said to him, Lord, if it is you, invite me to come to you on the water. And Jesus said, Come. And when Peter was come down out of the ship, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. If we stopped at verse 29, or if the story ended with verse 29 and moved on, you would hear sermons today about the great faith of Peter. Because Peter had enough faith to walk on water. Peter got out of the boat in a storm and took a step on water and walked. And people would talk about the celebrated faith of the apostle. But that's not what happens here. Let's go on. Verse 30, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched forth his hand and caught him and said to him, O you of, what are the 2 words? Little faith. Why did you doubt? We observed great faith in chapter 8 and 15. We saw that great faith may not be found in the church, but it has some characteristics. It's not selfish. It's seeking gifts for someone else. Great faith is earnest. It doesn't approach God almost as an equal, just talking, how to say this right. I talk to Jesus, I talk to the Father as if to a friend, but not a friend that's my equal. I have students that are my friends, and I have administrators, persons of high authority who are my friends. I don't talk to them the same. When I have a friend who's far above me, say a friend that's a king, we might be friends, but still I need to show a proper level of respect. And earnestness is a proper level of respect. A lack of earnestness, what's a good English word for a lack of earnestness? A blasé approach in conversation is disrespectful. And we saw those that had great faith, earnestness there, unselfishness there. We saw a feeling that they did not deserve anything from God. They didn't feel worthy. And we saw the centurion pushed through national prejudice. He was a Roman soldier. Maybe I didn't mention it, but Jews hated Roman soldiers. The Jews particularly hated Roman soldiers. So for that soldier to come to a Jew named Jesus required him pushing through some prejudice barriers that would make him feel like he shouldn't even bother. Well, we saw that Canaanite woman doing the same thing, and you know, I never even resolved that objection I brought up about the Canaanite woman. Let me do it now. Here in New Zealand, when you get far enough away from a big city, do you enjoy looking at the stars? When you're far away from a big city in the middle of the night, you can see, probably you can see part of the Milky Way here. I don't know. I can see it in some other parts of the world. You can see a glorious revelation of stars. Right now, the sky is blue. I can see it out this window behind me. And if you were to go and look up, the stars are still there. Every one of them is there. They're still shining. And there is nothing between you and them that is like a mirror that's just stopping their glow. The only reason you can't see them in the sky outside is because the sun is too bright. It's because the stars are not bright enough to show up when the sunlight is around. That's why as you get close to Auckland, the number of stars in the sky gets lower and lower and lower, until when you get to the city, it looks like you only have Mercury and Venus and a couple others. What's happening is stars aren't so bright as to show up when there's too much light around. I'm trying to illustrate something. That Canaanite woman, her faith was bright. It was strong and persistent. It pushed through apparent rejection and prejudice and difficulty. It held on and pleaded its cause through the very kind of problems that cause people to become atheists and agnostics today. She just kept holding on, holding on. She was treated badly, not by one or two Christians at church, but by every single believer. Every one of them tried to tell her to get out of town. And she held on anyway. You know, Jesus could have healed her daughter at the outset, but if he had, we never would have seen the nature of her faith. It never would have showed up. And by Jesus testing her faith and putting her, as it were, at arm's length, he knew her. He knew what she was like. He gave a chance for every bit of that persistence and force of character to show up, to give us a demonstration of what great faith is like. It's quite different than Peter's. Peter does believe in the power of Jesus. We know he believes in Jesus because what does he do when he starts to sink? What's he do when he starts to sink? He says, Lord, save me. Obviously, he still believes. His sinking was not the result of a doubt in the power of Jesus. His sinking was the result of a faith that just forgot about temporarily the power of Jesus. It was distracted by what was around it. He began to think about the waves and the sea, maybe even the people looking at him on the boat. He began to think about other things, and as he saw big waves coming his way, he's standing on water, but he doesn't imagine that he's going to be, what's going to happen when a wave gets to him. He can't picture it. He became afraid. That's what little faith is like. Little faith believes in the power of God, but it's an up and down experience. When it thinks about Jesus, when it's looking at those promises, it has a high point. When it ends up experiencing the death of a loved one, or a trial at church, or a trouble somewhere, it has a low point. When it meets those waves, it ends up struggling. When it's at the very bottom, it does cry out for help. Is little faith enough to get help from Jesus? Yeah. It is. It's enough. You could say even enough to be saved. I mean, at least that's the word that Peter used. He said, Lord, save me. But I want you to notice that little faith is not pleasing to Jesus. What did he say when he had pulled Peter up? He said, "O you of little faith, why did you," what's the verb? Why? Jesus doesn't think that it's rational to doubt when you meet challenges to your faith. If you've been with him for months and now you see a wave, Jesus doesn't think it's rational that you begin to doubt because of the wave. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, what I'm trying to show? I'm trying to say that Peter already had a significant foundation of reasons to believe. And God expected that those reasons would be meaningful to him at the very time that he meets a perplexity with which he's unfamiliar. He was expected, when he meets the trouble, to hang on to the data. I'd like you to see it even better. Look at chapter 16. This might help you remember it. Where do you find the chapters about little faith? It's the two chapters on either side of the Canaanite woman, chapters 14 and 16. We're going to look down at verse 5. Matthew 16, verse 5. And when his disciples were come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread. We skipped in these two chapters some part of the story, and part of the story was that Jesus fed thousands of people with a few loaves and a few fish. And when he fed thousands of people, he didn't create just exactly the amount of food needed for that meal. He created some extra. And he instructed them to gather up the little pieces. There's quite a lesson there, a practical one, that when people end up being prospered, they often become wasteful. Jesus says, no, even when prospered, be careful with the littles. Don't let little things go. Be careful with what you have. Wealth is not a reason for luxury. Wealth is a reason for generosity. There surely is a difference between the two. But anyway, so there had been extra food, and now they've come across the lake again, and they don't have any bread with them. Is it because Jesus made no provision? Is that why they don't? Did they blame Jesus for their lack of bread? What's the reason we just read there in verse 5? We didn't take it. We forgot. That's what they said. Frequently in your day, you are going to meet a trouble at work or with a family member, maybe with an unbelieving relative or even an unbelieving spouse. You're going to meet trouble and you don't know how to handle it. What I want you to understand is that if you find yourself lacking bread, it may be simply that you forgot to take it. I mean, manna was like that. The manna came every single day, just enough for each person, but you had to get it before the sun came up. When the sun comes up, it melts the manna. And when the manna is melted, you can't get access to it. I'm speaking about the special way God fed people thousands of years before the time of Jesus as an illustration that you and I need to connect with God in the morning. This morning, after I prayed, I was reading in Proverbs, a few chapters between chapters 5 and chapter 10. It's important for me to find information right there. I need to connect with God in the morning myself. You can't gather my manna for me, and I can't get manna for you. We have to get it. And the disciples, the reason they didn't have what they needed wasn't because of a failed provision. It's because they didn't take what was provided. You be sure that you're getting the provision in the morning that you're going to need through the day. You're still in chapter 16. Look at verse 6. Then Jesus said to them, "Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and of the Sadducees." Jesus often talked with metaphors. And metaphors are a science. I mean, as you learn to understand them, they become easier and easier and easier. Jesus expected at this point that they had enough experience to understand this metaphor when he said, "Beware of the leaven of the scribes and the Pharisees." Did he say scribes and Pharisees? Nope, Pharisees and Sadducees. Verse 7. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, "It is because we have taken no bread." Which when Jesus perceived, he said unto them, "O ye of," what does he say? He's not talking to Peter. He's talking to the 12. What does he say about the 12? Now remember, in chapter 14, he told Peter that he had little faith. In chapter 15, he told the pagan that she had great faith. And now he's saying to all the disciples, they have little faith. It had to be a difficult day for them to be compared that way. But notice what he said when he told them they had little faith. He said, "Why do you reason among yourselves because you've brought no bread? Do you not yet understand?" Do you know the implication of the word yet? Jesus doesn't rebuke people for a lack of understanding unless there's been opportunity to understand. Jesus doesn't rebuke human weakness. He doesn't rebuke someone because they lack comprehension. But he rebukes the disciples not for their lack of understanding, but for their lack of understanding yet. That is, they should have known by now. There had been opportunity for them. He said, "Do you not yet understand? Neither remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up? Neither the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many baskets you took up? How is it that you do not understand that I spake it not to you about bread, that you should beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees?" Then they understood. What do I see here in Matthew 16? I see that when Jesus worked a miracle in the presence of his disciples, he expected them to keep it in mind. He expected the miracle of yesterday to have an impact today. That is, the evidence was yesterday, but the evidence ought to be cherished so as to help me in my trouble today, in my trial today. He doesn't expect that the evidence is only useful when you encounter it and then you forget. I think I'll testify about my experience with these things. I have personally experienced hundreds of very plain miracles in God's work. Hundreds of them. In the literature work, going door to door, trying to help people take an interest in spiritual truth, I have witnessed and seen miracles. But I became disappointed in my own self when I observed that if I experience a miracle on Tuesday, if I don't write it down and share it with someone, that by Thursday, it's almost as if it happened to somebody else. I mean, in my own nature, it's easy to cherish a doubt, to feel a perplexity, to wonder if, It's almost like my sinful, depraved nature doesn't want to hold on to evidence for faith. So that if I'm going to maintain faith, I need to write down, record, and share. I need to do something to keep fresh the fact that God has worked a miracle for me. Otherwise, how can I say it? It's not rational, it's irrational unbelief. 10 miracles to encourage my faith, 1 perplexity a week later, and I'm struggling with doubt. That's not rational. That's just crazy. But that's natural to us. And what you see here in Matthew 16 is Jesus expects us to keep fresh the miracles he's worked. He wants us to hold those things in mind, and they will help us. One reason we don't understand the Bible is that we're too distracted with what's going on right around us. The here and now. There's waves, there's hunger. Waves and hunger and embarrassment and sunshine. What's happening right now has all my attention. That is, I'm not using my imagination the way it was meant to be used. My imagination is almost dormant right now, or maybe it's even being used to imagine terrible things tomorrow. The imagination was never given to help you imagine terrible things tomorrow. It wasn't given to help you worry. That's not the purpose of your imagination. It was given so I could have access to yesterday's miracles, to 2,000 years ago, the sacrifice made for me. I should have my mind on those things, but instead my imagination is just looking at tomorrow's trouble, or it's dormant, and I only see waves and hunger. And when you're looking right like that, you don't understand spiritual things. Jesus talks to you with a simple metaphor, and you don't get it. And you can't get it until your mind rises above what's right around you, and you begin to think about the things that are eternal and more important and significant. Let me review what we've said about faith today. I haven't given you a definition, but I've given you some pictures. Pictures of what great faith is like and what little faith is like. Great faith, wherever it's found, looks the same. It is unselfish in its nature. It's asking God. It's like John Knox asking God to give him Scotland. Great faith is selfless in its requests. But what is little faith like? Little faith is all about me. I need help in my waves. I need food. I forgot my bread. I'm embarrassed. I forgot my bread. I'm embarrassed. People are seeing me sink. That's what little faith is like. It's all about me. What is great faith like? Great faith pushes through obstacles. It pushes through apparent prejudice, rejection. If it goes and kneels down on the mountain and prays for rain and looks up and sees nothing, it goes back and kneels down and prays again. Great faith pushes through difficulty and apparent rejection. So how many times did Elijah pray? Oh, he prayed 7. Well, don't think that's because that was the limit. It's because after the 7th prayer, he saw a cloud. But if there had been no cloud after prayer 7, he would have prayed 8 times. That's the way great faith is. It pushes through difficulty, through rejection. What is little faith like? Little faith feels just about that God ought to give it help. Little faith feels like it's entitled to help from heaven. I'm a Christian, I'm a Jew, I'm a special one, maybe even I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I feel like I'm entitled a bit. That's not what great faith is like. Great faith realizes it doesn't deserve anything from God. It would have no courage to even ask, except for it believes that God cares about needy people. So great faith pushes through its unworthiness to ask for gifts on the basis of God's kindness. Before we close, I think I ought to give you a definition of faith. And it's not going to be Hebrews 11:1, although you might look at that for a definition of faith, but I'm going to tell you a practical definition that I think fits with Hebrews 11 as a whole chapter. You can find this definition of faith if you compare two ideas that are both in Scripture repeatedly. One of them, which you find in Matthew 4, verse 4, and in Luke 4, verse 4, is that man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Another one that you find, for example, in Habakkuk 2:4, and you find it in Hebrews 10, you find it in Romans chapter 1, but I don't know which verse. It might be verse 15. You find that the just shall live by faith. If you put these two together, you come to one of two conclusions. Either there are two ways to live, or else these verses describe the same experience. Can you see the logic of that? It's one or the other, and the Bible never presents two ways to live. So I put these two together, and I understand faith as living by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. Faith is taking God at His word, depending on that word to do what it says. That's why Paul says in Romans 10, he says, faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. He doesn't mean that when you hear the word, you automatically have faith, but he means that you can't have faith until you hear the word of God, because faith is what you do with the word. When you have the word and you live by the word, that is faith. This is why I don't have a lot of use for that interesting illustration where people put a chair on the stage and they ask you to sit in it and they say you have faith in the chair. If you've used that illustration, I'm not condemning you, but I just want you to think for a minute that God isn't a chair. And you're saying, I didn't say that. I know, but just think a bit further. Faith is something you do with God's word because God's word has creative power. It's the creative power of the word that is the basis for why you should have confidence in it, why you should live in harmony with it. I think that technically you can't have faith in my word. When you have confidence in me, that is, you can call it faith if you want, but it's nothing like the kind of faith that saves. That's an opinion. But faith in these two verses isn't an opinion. When you sit in the chair, your opinion is the chair is going to hold you up. But faith is something more. Faith is a choice to live in harmony with God's word, to harmonize with it. So if faith comes to a promise, faith looks like confidence. But if faith comes to a warning, faith looks like, I don't want to say it looks like it's startled, but faith looks like preparation to avoid the promised danger. Faith is a reaction to what God says. And what we've seen in Matthew 8, Matthew 14, Matthew 15, Matthew 16 is a beautiful picture of how Jesus rewards great faith and how he interacts with little faith. Little faith, he wants to make it grow. He engages your little faith and says, would you please pay more attention to the miracles I've worked for you? Remember how I helped you last week? Don't forget the answers to prayer. Please build up a basis for your faith. Collect some data so that when you come to a perplexity later on, it's not going to throw you over. And when I do this myself and I find in the Bible beautiful prophetic data, I find beautiful health data, and then you come and you show me something in the Bible that's just terrible, apparently, and you're asking me, how can I believe when I see that? I might not know the answer. Maybe I can frankly admit to you that that thing you showed me bothers me. I don't know how to see it properly, but I can't throw out my faith. Is that because I'm just stubborn, because I've taken a leap in the dark and I'm just committed? Is it because I just want to believe no matter what the data says? No, that's stubbornness. That's not faith. I believe because it's the only rational thing I can do. I believe not because I have a rational answer for every question, but because I have enough evidence to make faith the only rational response. I guess I could say it 5 more times, but I think you understand. That last thought that needs review is, don't suppose that in your faith camp are the people that have the greatest faith in New Zealand. Don't suppose that you've already collected the great faith people among your little collection of disciples. I know you don't call yourself disciples, but you understand. Don't suppose that that's where all the faith is. In all likelihood, there is great faith outside that you've never seen that will show up when it's dark enough. And if we can find it, why, I better answer that question. Why didn't God choose the centurion and the woman to be his disciples? It's because our obligation to serve God is not related to the size of our faith. It's related to the quantity of our light. Let me illustrate that using that same method I used earlier. So if I have here 2 men, one man is very generous, and I give him 1 ringgit to share, and one man is stingy, and I give him 1,000 ringgits to share. Which one has the greater obligation to share? It's the one with the 1,000, not because he's more generous. In fact, he's more stingy. The greatest generosity might be found somewhere else. What's going on in the Bible is that the Canaanite, he had a generosity, if you will, if I can use my own illustration. He had great faith, but he didn't have a lot of knowledge. He didn't know about the sanctuary. He didn't know about the history of the Old Testament. He didn't know about the meaning of Jehovah and his names. Maybe you don't even know that. Maybe we don't. I'm not saying that's a critical feature that you need to learn before you do anything, but I'm just trying to illustrate he didn't have that background of growing up in faith. The Canaanite woman, she had made a great step to call Jesus the Son of David and to worship him, but it's very doubtful that she knew the story of Noah and the flood or Sodom and Gomorrah. Very doubtful that she had a basis of understanding the Old and the New Covenant, Jeremiah 31. It's not likely. But the disciples, they had those things. They had a basis of understanding. They had truth that the world needed. And because they had so much knowledge about Jesus and experience with him, they understood him to be the Messiah. They had a wealth that made them obliged. But even before that time, they had a wealth of knowledge that came with their Jewish growing up. Jesus selected disciples on the basis of the fact that they knew the truth and they were teachable. I'm trying to say that today, here in New Zealand, there may be plenty of people that are outside the truth. They know very little. They've learned something. They went searching and they found something. Maybe they found out that Jesus is the Son of David. Maybe they've learned that you can come to him and get help when you need it. Maybe they're pushing through obstacles to believe when everyone around them is not believing. Jesus recognizes that. He calls that great faith, and he invites us to develop it ourselves, to learn to put ourselves on the side of right, to push through obstacles, to believe when it's difficult, to separate our faith and our feeling. So when we feel down, we just continue to hold on, to act as if our faith were invincible. That's the invitation. He's asking Peter, James, and John, who have weak faith, not to just give up, but to develop strong faith so that they can be more useful for him, be sent by him to do great things. That's what he wants for us too. Amen. Let's kneel for prayer. Our Father in heaven, I want to ask that you would finish what you've started with us. that you would give us great faith, not as a miraculous gift, but as an experience of learning to trust you. Remind us of those things you've done in the past that are evidence of your love and power. I thank you and ask for these gifts in the name of Jesus. Amen.